May 3rd, 2026, 14:22, local time. The Philippine Sea, approximately 340 nautical miles east of the Philippine island of Luzon, and 680 nautical miles south-southwest of the Japanese port of Sasebo. The sea state is 3, moderate, with a 2.1 meter swell from the northeast and wind at 18 knots. Overcast at 3,000 feet. Intermittent rain squalls reducing visibility to between 4 and 8 nautical miles in the affected sectors. The kind of weather that makes everything harder. Radar clutter, acoustic noise, limited air operations. A U.S. Navy underway replenishment group is holding a northwest heading at 14 knots. At the center of the formation is a Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo and ammunition ship, 210 meters in length, 40,000 tons loaded, carrying aviation fuel, Mk-54 bombs, SM-6 reload canisters, and approximately 1,400 tons of provisions for forward deployed strike group assets. Alongside on the starboard beam, connected by fuel hoses and highline cargo rigs, is a Nimitz-class carrier receiving its replenishment cycle. The carrier has been alongside for 47 minutes. It will need another 68 minutes to complete the transfer. For those 68 minutes, both vessels are constrained. The carrier cannot maneuver freely while connected to the replenishment ship. The replenishment ship cannot maneuver freely while the carrier is alongside. Both are locked into a fixed heading, a fixed speed, and a fixed position relative to each other. A 210-meter vessel and a 332-meter vessel traveling in close formation at 14 knots, presenting a combined radar cross-section visible for hundreds of miles and an acoustic signature that fills the water column for dozens of nautical miles in every direction. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are positioned as anti-submarine warfare screen vessels. One 4,000 meters ahead of the formation on a zigzag pattern, one 3,500 meters to the port side, both with their SQS-53C hull-mounted sonars in active mode, pinging at 8-second intervals. They are pinging. They are not finding anything. Welcome. I'm your host at Navy Legends. Tonight, we are examining a vulnerability that sits at the absolute center of U.S. Navy power projection capability. Not the carrier's offensive systems, not its air wing, not its Aegis defensive screen, but the logistical foundation that makes everything else possible. A carrier strike group without fuel, without ammunition, without resupply, is a very expensive collection of anchored steel. The underway replenishment cycle, the routine, extraordinary act of transferring thousands of tons of critical supplies between ships at sea while both are moving, is the operational heartbeat of the U.S. Navy's ability to sustain forward presence. And for 68 to 120 minutes during every replenishment cycle, the carrier is precisely as vulnerable as it will ever be. Tonight, we examine what a Chinese Type 093 Shang-class nuclear-powered attack submarine can do with that window. This is a fictional simulation. Every platform is real. Every tactic described has a documented basis in PLA submarine warfare doctrine. Let's begin. The Type 093 Shang-class is China's primary nuclear-powered attack submarine. It displaces approximately 6,000 tons submerged, carries U-6 heavyweight torpedoes and YJ-18 submarine-launched anti-ship cruise missiles, and has a radiated noise level that Western intelligence assessments place somewhere between the Soviet Victor III and Los Angeles-class submarines. Quieter than anything China has previously fielded. Substantially louder than the most advanced Russian or American nuclear boats, but quiet enough to pose a serious detection challenge in the acoustic conditions of the Philippine Sea. Those acoustic conditions are the key. The Philippine Sea in May is characterized by a deep sound channel, the SOFAR channel, centered at approximately 800 to 1,000 meters depth, where sound energy can travel for hundreds of nautical miles with minimal attenuation. A submarine operating above the sound channel, in the surface duct between the thermal layer and the surface, benefits from the reverse of this phenomenon. Its noise is trapped in the surface duct and masked from sensors below the thermocline, while sensors operating from above. Hull-mounted sonars on surface ships find their active pings refracted away from the submarine's depth bracket before they can produce a reliable return. The Type 093 had been holding position at 180 meters depth, just below the thermocline, in the acoustic shadow zone created by the thermal boundary layer, for 6 hours and 14 minutes. It had been tracking the replenishment group since 8 o'clock that morning, using passive sonar alone, listening to the broadband noise of 2 large vessels and their escort screen, with the precise, patient attention of a crew that had been trained for this specific scenario. The commanding officer of the Type 093 had specific orders. His mission, transmitted in a compressed burst from a PLA Navy communications facility in Sanya, Hainan Province, at 2:40 that morning, was not to attack the carrier. The carrier was the high-value target that every American defensive planning assumption was oriented around protecting. Attacking the carrier directly, attempting to put a torpedo under the keel of a Gerald R. Ford-class nuclear-powered warship, would immediately escalate the engagement to a level that Chinese strategic planners were not, at this moment, authorized to pursue. His orders were to attack the replenishment ship. The strategic logic was precise. Sinking the Lewis and Clark-class vessel would not sink the carrier. What it would do was impose a logistical crisis on the entire strike group within 96 hours. A carrier with diminishing fuel and ammunition stores, 680 miles from the nearest friendly port, must choose between retreating or remaining on station in degraded capacity. Either outcome serves the PLA objective without directly engaging the carrier and triggering full U.S. escalatory response. At 14:22, the commanding officer reviewed his firing solution. The replenishment ship was at a range of 4,800 meters, bearing 284 degrees, speed 14 knots, course 318 degrees. The carrier was alongside the replenishment ship's starboard beam, which meant that a torpedo fired at the replenishment ship from the submarine's current position, approaching from the port side of the replenishment formation, would not pass through the carrier's position. The geometry was clean. He authorized firing. At 14:22:11, the first U-6 heavyweight torpedo left tube 1. At 14:22:19, the second U-6 left tube 3. The U-6 is a Chinese heavyweight torpedo, 533 mm diameter, 7.8 meters in length, active/passive acoustic homing, maximum speed 65 knots, maximum range 45 kilometers at reduced speed settings. The 2 torpedoes were set for a medium speed run at 45 knots, a setting that balanced closing time against acoustic signature, since a torpedo running at maximum speed is significantly louder and more detectable. At 45 knots, the distance of 4,800 meters would be covered in approximately 3 minutes and 34 seconds. The Type 093 immediately began its post-firing evasion sequence, turning to a bearing of 047 degrees, increasing speed to 20 knots, descending to 280 meters to get below the main thermocline and into the deeper sound channel where its noise would be masked by the SOFAR propagation geometry. Aboard the forward screen destroyer, 4,000 meters ahead of the formation on the replenishment group's port bow, the SQS-53C sonar registered an anomalous contact at 14:22:44. Not a clean submarine contact. Not the clear broadband signature of a submerged vessel at maneuvering speed. A brief, distinct, high-frequency transient, the acoustic signature of a torpedo tube opening and a weapon ejecting, followed by the growing narrowband line of a torpedo propulsion system at 45 knots. The sonar supervisor identified the transient as a probable weapon launch at 14:22:51, 40 seconds after the first torpedo had left the tube. He immediately called it. Con, sonar, probable torpedo in the water, bearing 278. Second contact, bearing 279. 2 units. Assess inbound. The watch officer in the Combat Information Center had the contact data in front of him at 14:22:54. He called General Quarters and immediately broadcast on the formation tactical net. Torpedo warning. Torpedo warning. 2 units in the water, bearing 278. Origin estimated bearing 278 from screen vessel 1. All ships take immediate evasive action. The warning reached the replenishment ship's bridge at 14:22:58, 47 seconds after the first torpedo launch. The replenishment ship's commanding officer faced an immediate and brutal dilemma. Taking evasive action, accelerating, turning, while still connected to the carrier by fuel hoses and highline rigs, would not be possible without first breaking the connection. Breaking the connection required a controlled emergency breakaway sequence that would take 90 to 120 seconds to execute safely, or an immediate emergency breakaway that would be executed in 20 to 30 seconds by cutting the hoses and rigs under tension, destroying the equipment, potentially injuring sailors at the connection stations, and leaving 400 meters of hose in the water between the two ships. He ordered immediate emergency breakaway at 14:23:01. On the carrier's deck, the breakaway alarm, 3 blasts on the ship's whistle, sent replenishment station crews diving away from the connection rigs. The fuel hoses were pressurized. When the quick disconnect valves were activated, the pressure drove aviation fuel through the disconnected lines for 3.1 seconds before the flow control valves closed. Approximately 800 liters of JP-5 aviation fuel sprayed across the carrier's portside fueling station. No ignition, no fire. The fuel ran into the scuppers and overboard. The physical separation of the two ships began at 14:23:18, 27 seconds after the breakaway order. The replenishment ship began turning to starboard at maximum rudder, accelerating to its emergency speed of 21 knots. The carrier turned to port, its 4 shaft steam turbines pushing it rapidly toward 28 knots. The first torpedo had now been running for 1 minute and 7 seconds. It was approximately 2,700 meters from its original aim point. Its acoustic seeker was searching. Active pinging in the forward sector. Passive listening in the rear arc. The replenishment ship had been its designated target based on the pre-programmed bearing and range data from the Type 093's firing solution. That firing solution was now 27 seconds old, and the target had changed course and accelerated. The U-6's seeker acquired the replenishment ship's acoustic signature at 14:23:31. The broadband noise of its propulsion system, now at emergency speed, was detectable even through the surface duct acoustic masking. The torpedo turned to intercept the new target position, recomputing its approach angle. The forward screen destroyer, having broadcast the torpedo warning, was now conducting its own emergency anti-submarine response. Its commanding officer had ordered immediate sprint toward the estimated submarine launch point. Bearing 278 degrees, range estimated 4,500 to 6,000 meters from the formation center, and had authorized a PLA ASROC launch against the datum, the RUM 139. PLA ASROC left the destroyer's VLS at 14:23:09. 58 seconds after the torpedoes had been detected, the rocket flew to the computed datum point and dropped its Mk-54 lightweight torpedo at 14:23:26. The Mk-54 entered the water and began its search pattern. The Type 093 was not at the datum. It had been maneuvering since the moment of firing, descending and accelerating on a bearing that took it away from the launch point at 20 knots. By the time the Mk-54 entered the water at 14:23:26, the submarine was 1,100 meters from its launch position and moving. The Mk-54's search pattern, a spiral expanding outward from the datum at 40 knots, would need to expand to a radius of 1,100 meters, plus the additional distance the submarine covered during the Mk-54's search transit time to have any chance of detection. The Mk-54 searched. It found nothing in the first 90 seconds. Meanwhile, the replenishment ship's AN/SLQ-25 Nixie torpedo decoy system had deployed within 18 seconds of the torpedo warning. The system is designed for rapid deployment precisely because those seconds matter. The Nixie tows behind the ship on a cable and emits acoustic signals designed to mimic the propulsion noise of the ship itself, creating a false acoustic target for homing torpedoes. Against a purely passive acoustic homing torpedo, the Nixie is effective. Against the U-6's combined active/passive seeker, the effectiveness is degraded. The active ping mode of the U-6 seeker can discriminate between the genuine propulsion source and the decoy by correlating the acoustic reflection with a physical hull. A decoy towed behind the ship on a cable produces an acoustic source at a range from the ship that does not correspond to a hull return in the active mode. The U-6's seeker, operating in combined mode, evaluated the Nixie signal at 14:23:44 and rejected it. It maintained track on the replenishment ship's hull. The first torpedo struck the replenishment ship at 14:25:38, 3 minutes and 27 seconds after launch. The impact point was the port quarter, approximately 40 meters forward of the stern, at the waterline. The U-6's 300-kilogram warhead detonated on contact. The explosion opened a hull breach approximately 2.1 square meters in area. The blast destroyed the port steering gear compartment and severed the port shaft. Flooding began immediately at a rate the damage control assessment would later estimate at 2,200 liters per minute. The ship took an immediate 11-degree port list as the flooded compartment shifted the vessel's center of buoyancy. The replenishment ship had 12 damage control parties. All 12 were at their stations within 60 seconds of the detonation. The flooding rate in the port quarter was beyond the capacity of the compartment's integral pumps. They were sized for controlled flooding scenarios, not for a 2.1 square meter breach at the waterline. Emergency submersible pumps were deployed, but the flooding rate exceeded pump capacity by approximately 800 liters per minute. The ship was going to flood. The question was how long it would take and whether the flooding could be slowed enough to allow emergency towing to shallow water or a friendly port. The second torpedo arrived 8 seconds after the first, at 14:25:46, striking the replenishment ship's bow section at the waterline on the port side. The approach angle had shifted as the torpedo tracked the maneuvering vessel from a slightly different geometry. This detonation opened a second breach of approximately 1.4 square meters in the forward cargo hold area. The forward cargo hold contained aviation fuel in bladder tanks. The U-6 warhead detonated against the hull plating 3 meters from the nearest JP-5 bladder. The detonation pressure ruptured the bladder and ignited the fuel. The fire that began in the forward cargo hold at 14:25:47 was, in the damage control assessment conducted in the following days, the decisive factor in the eventual loss of the ship. A flooding casualty on a large cargo vessel, even a serious one, can be managed with time and equipment. A fire in a cargo hold containing aviation fuel, with 40,000 tons of stores, including ammunition canisters in adjacent spaces, operating in conditions where the flooding casualty has already compromised the ship's ability to maneuver to optimal firefighting heading. That combination is the scenario that damage control doctrine describes as a developing catastrophe. The cargo ship's commanding officer issued the order to abandon ship at 15:19, 53 minutes after the first torpedo impact. The fire had spread to 2 adjacent cargo spaces by that point. The ship's list had increased to 22 degrees. The flooding rate, despite maximum damage control effort, had reached a point where 3 compartments were fully flooded and 2 more were taking water faster than the pumps could manage. The ship sank at 16:44. It took 2 hours and 22 minutes to sink from first torpedo impact. In those 2 hours and 22 minutes, the crew of 581 sailors conducted an extraordinary damage control effort that saved every one of their shipmates. All 581 crew members were recovered from the water and from life rafts by the carrier's helicopters and the 2 escort destroyers within 90 minutes of the abandoned ship order. No lives lost. The ship was gone. The Mk-54 torpedo from the initial ASROC had not found the Type 093. A second ASROC launched at 14:26:40. After the port screen destroyer had been vectored toward a new datum generated by the towed array sonar contact from the forward screen vessel, produced a Mk-54 that searched for 4 minutes and 22 seconds before acquiring a contact at 14:31:14. The contact was the Type 093, now at 310 meters depth and 4,800 meters from the original launch point, running at 15 knots on a bearing of 034 degrees. The Mk-54 achieved a hit on the submarine's aft section at 14:31:41. The 44-kilogram warhead detonated against the Type 093's pressure hull in the engineering compartment area. The explosion damaged the submarine's primary propulsion shaft and cracked the pressure hull over its 0.6 meter section in the aft engineering space. The submarine began flooding in the engineering compartment and immediately began emergency blow procedures. The The Type 093 surfaced at 1434.09, approximately 6.2 nautical miles north-northwest of the replenishment ship's position at that time. The carrier, now at 28 knots and 11 nautical miles away, immediately turned toward the surface submarine. The forward screen destroyer closed to 800 meters and trained its 5-inch gun on the submarine's conning tower. The submarine did not fire. Its crew began appearing on the pressure hull casing within 90 seconds of surfacing. The international signal of distress and the practical signal that the submarine's commanding officer was not prepared to continue the engagement from a surfaced, damaged boat under the guns of a U.S. destroyer at 800 meters. The standoff lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The diplomatic conversation it triggered lasted considerably longer. China's initial response was 8 hours of official silence before a Ministry of National Defense spokesman characterized the submarine as having been conducting a routine patrol unlawfully attacked by U.S. forces. The statement made no reference to the replenishment ship on the floor of the Philippine Sea. The United States released the engagement audio, sonar recordings of the torpedo launches, weapon impacts, and the Type 093's propulsion signature. Within 36 hours, the recording was acoustically undeniable. China revised its characterization, describing the weapon's employment as a response to provocative U.S. surveillance activities. The replenishment operation had taken place 340 nautical miles east of the Philippines, well outside any jurisdiction area China's own published maritime claims supported. The revised statement was not credible. It was not intended to be credible. It was domestic political cover. The NSC met within 2 hours of the sinking. The administration chose a measured response. A second carrier strike group was ordered to the Philippine Sea within 24 hours, and the U.S. ambassador to Beijing delivered what a leaked State Department cable described as the most direct diplomatic communication between the two countries since 2001. The surfaced Type 093 was escorted to the edge of the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone and observed departing northward on diesel backup propulsion before the escort terminated. The missing piece. The after-action review spent the most pages examining was the 47-second detection gap. 47 seconds. In those 47 seconds, the replenishment ship could have begun its emergency breakaway and gained 90 additional seconds of maneuvering time. Those 90 seconds would have moved the first impact point from the port quarter to the stern, where hull structure is thicker and critical spaces less vulnerable. The damage control assessment concluded that a 90 seconds later impact would likely not have ruptured the fuel bladder that triggered the fire. 47 seconds cost the ship. The gap existed because the SQS-53C hull-mounted sonar in the Philippine Sea acoustic conditions at 1422 had a reliable detection range against the Type 093 operating in the thermal shadow zone of approximately 3,800 to 4,200 meters. The submarine had fired from 4,800 meters, outside the envelope. Its commanding officer had calculated exactly where that envelope ended before he pulled the trigger. This is what Navy Legends returns to in every scenario that touches on underwater warfare. The sonar detection problem in real-world acoustic conditions is not the sonar detection problem in the training environment. The Philippine Sea thermocline, the surface duct propagation, the background noise of two large ships at operational speed, all compressed the effective detection range of the best hull-mounted sonar in the U.S. Navy's surface ship inventory to a number that the Type 093's commanding officer had calculated precisely before he fired. He fired from outside the envelope. He knew where the envelope was. He had that knowledge because PLA submarines had been shadowing and acoustically characterizing U.S. Navy surface combatants and their escort sonars for years, building a database of real-world detection range performance that is, by all available assessment, substantially more complete than the U.S. Navy's own published specifications. The answers exist. Extended towed arrays on escort vessels operating at greater standoff distances, maritime patrol aircraft with sonobuoy coverage of approach corridors, increased escort screen standoff distance from the protected formation. None of these bring back the Lewis and Clark-class ship. None are simple to implement in the operational environment of a carrier strike group at sea, 340 miles from the nearest port. But they are the answers. and they need to be implemented at the pace of the threat, not at the pace of the acquisition system. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.